Hey everyone, I'm going to chat about weaving ethics into product management. I am Tanya, I'm VP of Product at Aura. Some of you might also know me from the Women in Tech groups, which I founded a number of years ago. Hello Emily, you should be sitting at the front. My lovely co-founder back there. It's been a couple of years since I've given a talk in public, which may surprise no one. I'm a little bit rusty and my failure mode is apparently speed running talks. I did a 32-slide talk in about 9 minutes earlier today. So I'm going to try and slow down, but if I am moving a little bit fast, you can always give me a little hand signal and I will try and pause. I also don't want this to just be a monologue. I'm going to talk to you about what we do at Aura around this area and what I've seen that works. You folks can obviously ask questions, but afterwards I'd also love to hear about what you've seen that's been working in other places. So yeah, just a heads up that I'll expect some audience participation at the end, and I won't surprise you with that. So today I want to talk about the role organization culture plays in building great products, why diversity is important to product teams, including ethics in prioritization, who really are your stakeholders, and thinking about your technology choices. So I got passionate about ethics in tech when I was working in a company that built education software for students. You know how it goes. You're building a piece of software, you're thinking about the users that are going to use it, and sometimes you don't think much further than that. And we built a piece of software that allowed teachers to see what students were doing on their laptops at school, which sounds really great, right? Until we realized that those students took those laptops home, and sometimes those laptops were the only device that they had in their house, and their laptops were being used after school hours by siblings, by parents, and now their teachers could effectively see what dad was doing on the laptop in the evening, just really uncool, not great for privacy. And so as a team, we sat down and we worked out how we could change the software so that it only worked in school hours and within the school's IP range, which made us feel a lot better about it. But I think we would have liked it if we'd had those kind of discussions long before then, and if we hadn't made that kind of decision in the first place. So it really got me thinking about how we actually weave ethics and the implications on what we build into our product management practice. One other thing that probably needs to be pointed out is I don't have all the answers by a long shot. This is something that we're kind of entering into and trying different things, and all of our contexts are quite important. So what works well for Aura may not work as well for your organization. Your mileage may vary. Please take that into consideration. It's the classic product management, it depends. Should we ask Etty to come in? I know exactly who that laugh is.
US.
I love it. Thank you. So before I jump in, I'm going to be talking from my context of as VP of Product at Aura. And there are some common misconceptions about Aura. So let me just clear those up quickly before we even jump into it. It'll save us lots of questions afterwards. Aura is not CCTV cameras. And Aura is not facial recognition. It's also not scary spy software. Nah. What Aura is a faster way for organizations, currently retailers, to report crime in structured ways that help them connect the dots on the crime that's happening and help police focus on solving organized retail crime rather than petty theft. This also helps our customers keep their teams and customers safe in the face of rising levels of aggression, which I'm sure you folks would have heard about in the news and possibly seen. So just to give a quick perspective on retail crime, many retailers lose more to shoplifting than they make in profit. That is huge. It's more than $2 million a day in New Zealand. And New Zealand's one of the smaller markets that we're at. 10% of people drive about 60% of the malicious loss. This is not about kids stealing candy bars. This is really, really organized crime. And when a person is prevented from stealing, 48% of them don't steal again from the retailer within a 6-month period. So catching them is pretty important. Right, so back to the topic at hand. How do we try to ensure that the products that we build have a positive impact on society? Call me an optimist, but I like to believe that organizations exist to solve problems, and those problems are bigger than how do we make the most money in the shortest time possible. You'll have a much easier job working out how to build products that help people and avoid doing things that are harmful if it's actually built into the core culture of your organization. And I'm speaking from a place of privilege here, because I understand that a lot of you don't necessarily have the power to change your entire organization culture. But just a heads up that this is the context that I'm coming from, and I'll chat quickly about how this works at Aura. So at the start, it comes into our vision. So this means our vision at Aura is connecting communities to reduce crime, which is a pretty good goal to lead towards. And we can test any kind of product feature that we're asked to build against this vision and work out whether it's going to bring us closer to that or further away from. And it also means having a set of values or principles that we refer to on a daily basis in the work that we do. So our principles include things like seek perspective, solve problems. It includes things like be deliberate and be a partner. These aren't just things that we stick in like a corporate guide. They're things that really help us as product managers when we're having conversations with other people in the organization to have an official hook, especially when there's kind of squishy societal problems that we want to talk about. It gives me an official way to say, hey, let's seek some more perspectives on this. Let's go and chat to our general counsel. Let's get the privacy folks involved in here. And it also means more subtle, simple things around organizational culture, like being mindful of the subconscious impact that words can have. So for example, in Aura, we are very, very careful to refer to people rather than offenders, because that kind of language can be dehumanizing. It's really good, no matter what product you're in, to remember that people are at the end of it. So where does diversity and dissent play into this? Some of you folks will have been at Women in Tech meetups and heard me talk quite a lot about diversity. I know there's been quite a lot in the media and there's been lots of studies about how important it is, but I believe it's especially important to product. So we end up with these massive blind spots when we hire people into product through traditional pathways. So from engineering into product, and I'm sorry, I am one of those, but because of how male engineering tends to be, we end up with product teams that are largely male. It happens when we hire people we'd like to have a beer with after work rather than diversifying our team. We end up with homogenous teams, all with similar demographics and backgrounds. And this is absolutely pivotal when you're building features and when you're trying to make ethical decisions about what to build. We really need to have people in the room from different backgrounds with different perspectives, different lived experiences, and we need to encourage them to bring this with them into the day-to-day practices. We really need them to raise risks when we're building something. We need them to say, hey, this could negatively impact this particular community in this way. You don't really need to hire consultants and bring in experts all the time if you have these people on your teams. Although please do hire and pay consultants well as well. So when we're looking to hire, we're looking to hire people from different backgrounds, but more than that, we're also looking to hire people who are curious, people who question, people who take us up on some of the stuff in interviews. I'm always interested in people in interviews who ask ethical questions about what we're doing, what we're planning to do, how we're planning to work. We can build teams that can preempt issues rather than needing to be reactive when things happen. We also need to honor expertise equally across different areas of your organization, but understand which areas hold power. And in our organizations, this is often product design and engineering, and we need to embed people specifically in those teams. Working transparently and seeking perspectives on everything that you do really helps. It's kind of exercising that feedback muscle and making people aware that it's actually okay to share different opinions, that it's a safe space to do that. So one example for us that's come from having a diverse team is a few years ago, our product actually included an ethnicity field. Now, who knows how many ethnicities there are? There are hundreds. We're talking 300 plus ethnicities. And if we had to just look at you now, I think we'd do a pretty bad job of guessing what your ethnicity is. It came from us having a diverse team and kind of pointing these things out. that made us pull this out of our platform, regardless of the fact that it's in competitor platforms. We aren't going to be adding this in anytime soon. The big issue for us when we're chatting to our teams about this is not really us trying to pinpoint what ethnicity someone is. It's that data in enables data out. And we were very, very concerned that we could be inadvertently enabling racial profiling, which would be devastating. There's absolutely no way we'd be okay with that. Using ethics as a prioritization filter. So we actually include ethical considerations in our prioritization framework. You'll see it there just underneath vision, doing the right thing, which feels a little touchy-feely. But what this means to us is meeting legal requirements in all of the countries that we operate in. Side-eye to Facebook, who does not do this. Having robust privacy standards, but also meeting our values and principles. How do we feel about what we're doing? How does it align with being a partner? How are we going to sleep at night with what we're actually doing? And so this is something when we're prioritizing what work to go into the roadmap, it actually needs to be thought about by a product manager, and they need to think about, how this could be used, how it might be misused, and what the impacts of that would be. So including ethical considerations in your product planning. Whether your next step is a product narrative doc, a scope, a spec, a set of requirements, part of that really should include a step where the whole team working on it gives consideration to the ethical implications of the feature or the change that you're considering. We need to think about not just how to get to the next 1,000, next 10,000 users, but how we do the best thing possible for them and the communities that they're part of. So who are you building this for? What are they planning to do with it? How might they actually use it? What's the worst case scenario? And that one's really important. And then impact assessments. These are not only for privacy. You can actually run these for pretty much any technical change that's going to impact people. And I'd love to see that being done more frequently. If it becomes habitual, you won't have to stop for so long and wonder whether or not you should be running it. You just do. Heads up on this one, impact assessments aren't usually shared very widely, but the NHS in the UK and the Canadian government both have some processes and actual impact assessments that they share, so you can use those as templates. They're a really, really good start. It's a lot easier to fill out an impact assessment than to realize you needed one to start with. I don't know about everyone else here, but how many times have you released something thinking you knew how it was going to be used and then realized that users were using it in many different ways? We shouldn't be dismissive of users because we didn't fully understand the context that they were coming to our product with. As product managers, we often think that we have all of the context, and we sometimes think that we're a good representation of the user, but you've got many different users. And yeah, we're not the user. Consider your stakeholder mapping. We need to really widen our definition of stakeholders and whose needs we consider when we're doing design, discovery, testing. So we can't just think about the people who are buying your product and the people using your product, but also the people impacted by your product. Who are we leaving out? So at Aura, for example, we're a private sector company, and we build for both public and private sector. We're working with retailers and we're working with police. But can you imagine if we only stopped there when we were doing stakeholder mapping? We not only need to think about those two user groups, but we also need to consider the people being policed and the communities supporting those people. There's a tension between building something MVP or MVE, minimum viable product, and getting into the hands of users quickly and balancing the needs of even more users and as many users as possible. The moment something is built, it can be incredibly hard to reverse. This is both from a technical perspective, but also mentally. It's hard to undo something that we've spent a lot of time on. And so when we say that we iterate, it's important that we mean it, right? We have to be okay with going and changing things that have been done. We have to be culturally okay with refactoring our code, sometimes all the way back to the beginning, and making the organizations that we work with comfortable with that, even if it's something that you do in small steps. Cool. Uh, Lots of people think technology is neutral. It's not. Be very deliberate when you're building, not just what you build, but how. Think carefully about the technical decisions that you're making, because technology is not neutral. When we make assumptions and we have blind spots, we propagate these problems through code. Like we put it into code and then we spread it, and then we're like, wow, we've just made this societal issue so much worse. So whether it's machine learning, artificial intelligence, algorithms, facial recognition, at the end of the day, it's people who've built these things, and our biases kind of leak into this. Also, people trust technology. We can't always expect users to make good decisions and to understand that this technology is flawed. When computer says something, people trust it. The data that we use is imperfect. The data models are imperfect, and the assumptions that we made when we built these models were imperfect. I was chatting to someone earlier today, and they gave a great example of this. Amazon apparently built a hiring algorithm to help them hire better people faster. Except they trained it on 10 years of historical hiring data. And then they were confused when it was more heavily weighting CVs from men, because they tended to, in tech departments, hire lots of white men. And so the algorithm was like, this is what success looks like. And suddenly you have a process that's excluding women from your hiring. They probably had the very, very best of intentions. I don't think they would have thought about that for a minute. But you can't worry about this later. It needs to be important and considered at the outset, because seemingly small decisions in the beginning can have outsized impacts over time. And the implications are huge. So I often talk to my team, who's all online, hi team, about the fact that we're not Netflix. At Netflix, if you make someone a bad movie recommendation, they've probably lost 2 hours of their life. They've had a rubbish evening. They're probably not super happy with you. But you know what? They'll probably forget it in the morning. We're not working at Netflix. We're working on crime intelligence software. And the downside of us making a mistake is someone could go to jail. So we need to be very, very, very careful about what we're doing and what technology we're choosing to implement. Huh. Okay, you've got 3 seconds. Pick the person you think is going to steal from the fuel station. Ready? By the way, these are not real people. These are generated by AI. So customer success folks, customer service people at fuel stations up until now have been relying on their own perceptions of people to decide whether or not someone is likely to steal from their fuel station and whether to put them on prepay or not. Can you imagine some of these interactions between customers and staff, right? So they look out their window and they're like, you look dodgy. I'm going to put this pump on prepay. Whoever you chose from that picture is probably wrong. I mean, partially because it was fake pictures, but making the call based on your own intuition leads to some really awkward conflicts. You may have some regrets. And so sometimes when we are applying tech to this, the technology itself isn't bad. It's the way it's built, it's the way it's trained, and it's the way it's applied that can be problematic. And it's on us as makers and as evolvers of the technology to ensure that the application itself is responsible and ethical. And when done well, technology can actually improve and it can remove bias. So, for example, instead of relying on the customer service folks to look out the window and go, not sure about that guy, instead they lock fuel pumps based on data on what vehicles have actually done drive-offs. This vehicle has been involved in 3 drive-offs, maybe you want to lock the pump. It's absolutely irrelevant who's sitting in the vehicle. And it makes things a lot easier for them as well to have those interactions with customers. So to recap, organizational culture is the foundation. Build diverse teams, please, and seek their perspectives. Speak to myself or Emily about how you might do this. Include ethics as a prioritization filter. Cover ethical considerations in your product planning, and please start running impact assessments if you're not already. Consider a much wider pool of stakeholders than you might be now. And yeah, don't rely on tech being neutral. We really need to think about how these things are being trained. what they're actually bringing in. If you're interested in reading more about this, here are some of my very favorite resources. The first one is a book written by a number of people in New Zealand that is probably the best piece of literature I've read on ethics in tech in a very, very long time. So I highly recommend that. Stanford D School's done an equity-centered design framework that's pretty impressive. There is more on ethical design frameworks. There's a book called Weapons of Math Destruction, which is fascinating. Really, really, really fascinating. And then my favorite book that I recommend to pretty much everyone on our team is Intelligent Disobedience, Doing Right When What You're Told to Do Is Wrong. And it's a great book about changing organizational culture towards people who question and ask the hard things. If you want to chat more about this, you can find me on Twitter. I don't talk a lot about work, but I am there. There's lots about cakes and I'm a bit sweary. I do apologize. And like Xero and everyone else, we're always hiring. So if you are interested in coming and working for us, please do come and chat. I'd like to open up for questions, but also opinions on other things that people have seen that work well.
Yeah, and actually, firstly, Tanya, thank you very, very, very much. This has taken much more than 9 minutes, so thank you. Well done. Amazing job. But we do actually have quite a bit of time available for questions and discussion. So one thing I'd like to jump in with is actually probably right about May last year on World Product Day, we had a talk from Saley De Silva on called Beyond Human Centered. This is where she was referring to how products affect systems, and it's really, really, really fascinating. It's one of our most watched talks. We always wanted to continue that conversation. We got there a year later, but I highly recommend watching that talk. It is really, really, really amazing. One question I want to ask everyone, has ethics in your product featured in your worldview in the last 12 months? Put your hand up if that's happened to you. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Maybe I can pick on one or two of you just to tell me what that was about. How did it feature? And I'm going to pick on you, Emily, so you're looking to the side.
It's pick on Emily day today.
Looks like it. We're building a product to help people record their names and be able to pronounce each other's names, but this could be used as a tool for positive empowerment of teams to enable inclusivity and also potentially a way. Should I move?
Yeah, come forward with me.
Sorry.
Thank you.
Yeah, it could be used really well as a tool for good, or it could be used as a tool to potentially single out people who are underrepresented in tech already. So we've really considered a lot of these, but haven't done impact assessments. So thank you for that. Sorry for the feedback.
I'm not quite sure why that was happening. Yeah. Would anyone else who else would like to talk about how ethics is featured in their product? Don't mind me putting you on the spot. Who did I see put their hand up? So you put your hand up there. do you mind? Are you okay to mention?
I don't know if it's relevant necessarily, but so the company that I'm at is helping people with financial wealth, but there's a certain bar of literacy that's required to join into that. And part of the company's goal is to be a product that can get people to that level before joining, but at this stage we're currently not. So it's kind of a question of, well, how do we find out how to improve people's financial literacy so they can use this product, or is that even the priority that we want to do right now? So that's definitely something that's in discussion at the moment, and I think that plays a lot on ethics and how we approach things.
Thank you. Anyone else like to chip in with an example? Really love to hear more from the audience. Scared everybody. I don't think they have to come at the front. Right, we've got some questions from the room then. Paul. Right, so the question was, actually I'll let you repeat the question.
The question about how we engage with stakeholders who are people who also become offenders. I'm not quite sure what you're asking. Mm. Yeah. Yeah, people who are in the platform. So for a start, it's letting people know, making sure that they are warned that their data is being captured for a start, making sure that we do things like retaining data only for necessary amounts of time, anonymizing data when necessary, and working to actually work with the organizations that we work with, because it's their data that we're keeping, it's their data that we're holding on to, and making sure that they understand that they also have a kind of a responsibility to make sure people know that what's happening when they're going in their stores. You folks may have seen, if you're walking into a Countdown, there's a big sticker saying, Aura, you are being watched, you're on camera, and making sure that people don't actually put any information into our platform for innocent bystanders. So you're actually only being entered into this once you have committed a crime. Quite interestingly, one piece that we've done just around the using tech for good thing is people often load up an image from CCTV into our platform, but you're in a shopping center, right? There are other people around. And we were like, ooh, we're not sure about this. So now when you load an image into the platform, it says, hey, there seem to be 4 people in this image. Which was the one that you're reporting? And you click on the face and it automatically redacts all of the other faces in there. So looking at things we can do like that. Mm. Yeah. Mm. From people in the platform? Occasionally, yes. So occasionally, yes. Occasionally we get requests about like, what information do you hold on me on the platform? Occasionally we get requests to remove information where there was something that was erroneously added. And we engage with those people immediately and directly. So chatting to them. But I think we need to do more of that. So, we're also working with, for example, community police officers. We are looking at folks who are doing more rehabilitation stuff rather than criminal justice stuff. We would love to see people having better outcomes from that than going to jail, which is not really cool. The nature of the platform is that we're there to try and identify organized retail crime, but that's not the only crime that happens. And so every now and then you will get kind of petty criminals, you'll occasionally see juvenile folks being entered, and it's about how we can help get those out of the criminal system as fast as possible as well. A lot of this is around focusing police on organized retail crime. So previously, when crimes were being committed, police had to go and investigate every single one. It didn't matter if it was a kid stealing a candy bar. Now with systems like this and connecting the dots on, hey, this is actually repeat behavior, this is a group, they're working together, police can focus their efforts on that and hopefully take the focus away from the other folks. Yeah, it's a journey. It's a journey.
Got a question online from, I think it's Christine. How do you work in that? So I think this is referring towards the end where you're talking about diversity within your organization. How do you work in that diversity in this time when the job market is tight, or when the core executive team doesn't look like it's going to be shuffled anytime soon? I think it's one of those where do you start kind of questions.
Executive teams and boards are a really hard problem, right? So diversity of your general team is one thing. Someone once said, everyone wants to go to heaven, but no one wants to die. And so when you're looking at your board and your executive team, like everyone's like, yeah, diversity is important, but I don't want to step back from my role to give a place to someone from a different background. So it's incredibly hard to change the top of your organization. It's quite easy for us to build diversity in our engineering teams if we've thought about it early enough. We've thought about it early enough and we've looked at our hiring practices and we've made sure that our hiring practices are friendly to people of color, to women, to people from all sorts of marginalized backgrounds. It's easy for us to hire women and people of color when they see other people who look like them. But if you leave it too late and you end up with a homogenous team, it's very, very, very hard at that point to hire. You've got diversity debt at that point, and that is kind of harder to reverse than tech debt. I should step away from any engineers in the room when I say that. It's really, really, really hard. You kind of want your organization leadership to believe in the impact of diversity on their business and on the bottom line as much as you do. Otherwise, you are going to have a very, very, very hard road ahead. And none of us want to bring other people like us into organizations if they're not a safe space, if they're not a good place to work. One of the things that the NZ Tech Women and Non-Binary community on Slack does is we talk about the places that are good to work, and we try to get as many of our folks into those places as possible. I kind of wonder if any New Zealand organizations are like, wow, it's really easy for us to hire women and people of color at the moment. And I do also wonder if other organizations are like, not a single applicant, what is going on? We talk a lot. Yeah, I'm not sure if that helped. There are programs, by the way, trying to get more women into leadership and on boards. I'd like to see that extend not just to women, but to people of color. We've got a real problem with that in New Zealand right now, and I think we focus quite a lot on women rather than on the wider problem.
And I guess if I can add to that, the best way to start getting diversity into your organization is to start.
Yes.
Actually just start working on it. I've previously done this in an organization where, yeah, it was not the most diverse organization when I arrived there, and we just started to hire more diverse people. It wasn't that we were doing the stereotypical, oh, we need to prioritize diverse hiring. It was exactly what Tanya said. It was making us as an attractive destination to people who were diverse to come to us. I personally built very close links with the Women in Tech group, Tanya's group, and to be trusted by that group is the way to then connect with that group. And when you say, hey, I'm hiring, you'll be able to address that pool. But you have to build that trust first. You have to actually put in the hard work first. And that's not just about, hey, Anthony's a nice person, we should talk nicely about his organization. It's actually having proof points in the organization as well, organizational reputation and things like that. So yeah, it's not easy, but start.
Also, heckle your colleagues. If you see an interview pipeline that all looks the same, don't start interviewing. Like, until you've got a diverse pipeline, just don't even start. Yeah, quiet rebellions from the inside. I know that we kind of dug our heels in recently on a hire because the pipeline all was the same. And we waited until we had a diverse pipeline, and then we were like, right, now we go. But yeah, I think it's a little bit of a luxury again.
Quiet, coming from Tanya. Quiet rebellion. Oh dear. And so someone else online, Sissy, not quite sure who that is, has said, from a hiring perspective, I've heard leaders who put diversity targets into their recruitment partners or agencies. So we need a diverse pool of applicants or we won't use you. And I guess that will then turn into a two-way conversation as well, because it might be, hey, we need a diverse pool of candidates. In your current state, you're not going to get there. And so if that organization is challenging you back again, then, that's a sign that you need to do something. And hopefully they can offer positive tips about what you might be able to change. Something I've heard about, but I've never actually used, is the tool to check your job ads, I think, for neutral language and things like that.
Yes, I think it's Kat Matfield's gender decoder. You basically go and you paste your job ad into it, and it tells you if your job ad is coded masculine or feminine. So what the studies have shown is that job ads that are coded masculine, only men will apply to those job ads. Whereas if your job ad is coded feminine, men will still apply, but you'll also get women applying. Very interesting question from Emily around metrics. and how you track the impact of these kind of ethical decisions that you're making, and also your team's feeling about it. It depends. So it depends on the thing. So for example, we talked about the face redaction example. We are looking at the number of times more than one face is seen in a photograph, and the number of times that is now changed to one face. That's a way of actually measuring the impact of a very specific feature. About measuring the team's perception of it. I mean, my team is all online. I think we tend to hire people who feel quite strongly about this. It's something that in our hiring, we hire to rubrics. We look out for candidates who question us on ethics and things, not in a bad way. We're like, yes, okay, great, welcome. So yeah, that helps. But in terms of overall metrics, we don't have an overall like do no harm metric. I haven't found a good way of measuring it. We do it more on a case by case basis, and on, yeah, kind of gut feel as well. Like, how do we feel about what we're doing? Yeah, if anyone has a great answer on how to measure that, I would love it. There's a couple. You can yell? Okay, you yell, I'll repeat. Yeah.
When you put ethics in your prioritization framework,
Yeah.
how do you balance between, just thinking all the ethical points and shipping the product or features without getting dragged by all this discussion? Like, so with your laptop example, for example, like, how one, I guess you wouldn't really know that people would use, or other people would use the laptop outside of school hours.
I think we would have if we'd had a diverse team and we'd asked those questions.
Yeah.
We'd stopped.
And that actually leads to my first point, like, would you like fully like have a massive discussion about, oh, this is all the different things that we're going to think about and potentially delay shipment of your product?
Yeah.
Because trying to potentially get revenue or whatever.
Yeah. So you're asking about the tension between actually delivering products fast and the amount of time that this kind of process takes. Yeah. I think it's worth it. And I also think the amount of time it takes depends. So there are some discussions that are almost a no-brainer. They get resolved in about 15 minutes. I can think of one where I was like, hey, that's going to put queer people at risk. And I was waiting for an argument and they were like, remove it. So it was great. It was real fast. And then I can think of examples that are incredibly lengthy, very, very, very lengthy, particularly when we're looking at things like use of algorithms, use of machine learning. That's a very dangerous area. And so for those, we will literally spend weeks of time. We will engage consultants. We will go through full privacy impact assessments. We will look at all of the models that we could use. We will look at how those models were trained. And there's a real business cost to that. But I think we've got to decide kind of where your business sits and how valuable this is, and potentially also what the negative impacts are. So I feel like worst case impact for your business is that your business gets shut down, which would be really bad, or many millions of dollars of fines, for example, if you have a GDPR breach. So it depends on the thing, and it depends on your business's appetite for this kind of thing as well. I'm very lucky to work at a business with a very high appetite for this, probably largely driven by all of the people in the business. I think there was another hand.
There's a question online, and I'm glad that Christine's asked this one, because I thought, oh, this is a really hard question. Am I going to ask it myself and then get you shooting the evil looks? So Christine's question is, so coming also just riffing on that first example around app access might be breaching trust. Was it difficult or easy to convince the team that you needed to solve for that? And I guess to just sort of broaden that question, could you talk us through an example where it has been a difficult conversation?
That is a really good question. So thinking back to that, no, it was actually pretty easy. We were almost embarrassed that we hadn't thought about it. It felt like a no-brainer, and it also felt like something that was in the best interests of the schools and the school districts that we worked with. They did not want to be monitoring like non-school stuff either. You know, this was in their best interest as well as ours. And I don't remember what the development effort was of that. I think it was probably significant, but probably quite worth it as well. The ethnicity discussion that we had was an interesting one and a harder sell. It was a very, very, very easy sell for our founders, the CEOs, one of whom was a privacy lawyer before they founded Aura. But, you know, some of the sales team were harder to convince because their questions were around the fact that competitors do this. Their questions were around how we kind of compare to those, how we sell it. And the way we managed to convince them was by using data. So by looking at the data that we had in the platform and showing them just how inaccurate it was. So this is, you know, actively bad. And then by actually helping them tell the story. So we wrote up a piece on, you know, Aura being an image-first platform and how they can talk about this and how they can talk about the risks of racial profiling and the risks to those organizations as well, if they were doing this. So yeah, we had some pushback from some teams.
Do you ever encounter a situation where marketing
I'm trying to think of an example. So the question was, have I ever run into a situation where doing the right thing has made the product measurably worse? And what did we do in that situation? I don't know if we have. But I wonder if we would necessarily know. You know, we've got a lot of customers and we've had no churn, so I can't rely on churn data from that. We've certainly had a lot of feedback, like especially around the ethnicity thing. Like people get quite annoyed by that, but we believe it's the right thing to do. But I don't think it made our product worse. Yeah, absolutely. Measurably worse for who is a really good question. No, I think we've made other changes in product that made the product measurably worse. we've had to kind of claw our way back from that, but I don't think any of them have been around this particular area. Yeah, usually we're trying to make something prettier or whatever, and now it's like, whoops, it takes 7 minutes longer than it did before. Yeah.
When you joined, were you involved with development of your company?
So the question was, when I joined, was I involved in the development of our company values? No, when I joined, the company already had a set of principles and they were already relatively robust. But since then, the company did a bit of a review of them. And we found, for example, that one of the principles didn't land super well. We had a principle that was strong opinions loosely held. Which is sometimes a good way of entering into a conversation and saying, I have a really strong opinion about this, but I'm willing to be convinced in any direction. And the team shifted that one to seek perspective, solve problems, which felt a little bit more open-hearted, open-minded, and not so much leaning towards those of us who are more comfortable and more confident sharing their opinions in any situation.
Just about to launch our company values, which is amazing. And we launched when we merged with another company, right? What were the company values? We didn't design the company. We've gone through process. I don't. So and I said, hey, well, let's just let these four go out there and we can let's see how they work.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah. Sometimes I think the best thing to ever come out of Agile was retrospectives, and you can apply them to a lot of things. Yeah.
Yeah, because I've noticed I started tracking that they all seem to change about Google Spreadsheet.
Yeah.
Anyway,
You got a question when a company drops "Don't be evil" from their principles. Like, what are we replacing this with? Good luck. It's like you're starting. Mm. Mm. So the question was, say we had a very large client and they were asking us to do something that wasn't necessarily ethical and threatening to withdraw their business if we chose not to do that. We would welcome them leaving. But before we did that, we would probably have discussions about the why, and we would try to get them round to our way of thinking. We would try to convince them why it was a bad idea, why it was better not to do it. But I think if an organization was that badly aligned with our organization, then we're probably not the best provider for them either. Like it is probably better that they use a different solution than ours. And that's easy for us to say we're quite financially secure. I think that would be a lot harder decision if you were a small startup with a really short runway. Like that would really be hard. So I'm making it sound a lot easier than it would be for a lot of people.
And if I can add to that one as well, a principle I learned very early in my engineering career was never end up on the front page of somebody's newspaper or the lead story on the evening news. For technology, that used to never really be a thing, but I think the market awareness has shifted significantly, particularly in the last probably 3 or 4 years, to having a real high awareness of that. And so, my pushback to a client asking for something like that would be, do you want to be on the evening news? And if the answer is no, okay, let's have a conversation about how we avoid getting out of that. Because I think the awareness of these issues has raised significantly, particularly obviously with everything happening in the US at the moment. And also I think that's why this is a bit of a call to action to us as product people as well, that, we are often the connectors in our organization, connecting all these disciplines together. And so we are best placed to see and recognize these ethical issues when they come up and put our hands up and go, hey, maybe we want to have a conversation about this. And I think that's a real call to action to our community. And that was why I wanted to organize, this event and have Tanya speak and start this conversation, because I think in New Zealand, we've been quite quiet on this topic. I think, it's quite common discourse in the US in particular, is starting to kick off in Europe. I think New Zealand, we need to do a lot more in this space, because I think there is some risk down here that it becomes a blind spot, that just because we aren't getting bombarded with companies being on that front page, we as a profession are not really realizing the seriousness of this. So that's my call to action to everyone in the room and everyone online as well. Sorry. All right, do we have other questions? No? Oh, Leslie.
Yeah, so Lucy's asking if there have been any ethical considerations that have come up that have been quite divisive and how we've handled them. I think I talked about one around ethnicity and removing that, which we did have some dissenting opinions in the office around. I'm trying to think if there have been any others. There are often a lot of robust discussions around facial recognition and image recognition and the very real flaws in a lot of those tools right now. With every tech team, we've got people who are really, really enthusiastic about trying new tech, and we continue to have those discussions about why these things are not really ready for our kind of application, and the issues with them. So I know the technology is coming along quite far and quite fast, but until it's at a space that we're very comfortable with, I don't think we kind of venture down there. So robust discussions continue to be held about that kind of thing, but that's something that hasn't made it into product. It's something that we just talk about and argue about and poke at a little bit every now and then. So the question is around the grey areas where the things aren't so clearly ethical or unethical, and how we define that. That's interesting, because I don't think we've had any come up that weren't relatively clear. We've had some occasionally come up where we just hadn't thought about it until someone from a particular demographic on our team kind of raised it, and then it's like, oh yeah, we hadn't considered that. But now that we've heard about it, yeah, we can see where that's going. But we haven't had any where it's been like, not actually sure here. I feel like it's going to come up in future, and I think it's also going to come up in terms of just our application of tech, because sometimes it's not the tech itself and it's not necessarily the feature, but it's how you apply that feature. And that's where I think there are grey areas. You know, I talk about ethnicity, and that one is like clear. That is very, very, very clear. But you can actually use proxies for that kind of data. You know, you can use location as a proxy for ethnicity when you realize that people settle in groups a lot of the time. And so, you know, talking about South Auckland might be shorthand. So even when we feel safe where we're removing ethnicity, there could be other things that we haven't necessarily considered. There could be other things that are grey areas. There could be things that are proxies that we haven't necessarily considered for pieces of data. And that's one thing that comes up in like impact assessments is, you know, are there other ways that people could come to this? And how do you mitigate them? If you do, how do you watch for them? We do quite a lot of auditing, and what we do is visible auditing. We're like, your use of this is being watched. You know, it's not just being audited in the background. We are logging your usage of this. And I feel like that's also quite a good deterrent for potential misuse. Yeah, it's a good question. There'll be some grey areas.
You spoke about sort of the ethical considerations with
Mm.
indirect uses.
Mm.
How far do you cast the net that's maybe reasonable or perhaps responsible for something that a ethical consideration becomes in touch?
That is a great question, and it's one that I tend to leave to our general counsel. So impact assessments actually include appropriate use of technology. So is this use appropriate for this particular thing? I think there was a case recently where 7-Eleven made it onto the front page of the newspaper because they were using facial recognition like as part of some kind of loyalty program or something. And that was deemed inappropriate use of technology for the usage. You really do not need to be using that particular tool. The risks are just too high. And so there is a balance here. There is a trade-off. And we do luckily have in-house legal counsel to actually consider whether the tech that we're using is appropriate, and that we've considered all of the possible harms, all of the possible mitigations, and to go, actually in this case, yeah, we're going to lean to this side of the coin. But I feel like our team should also be chatting about it, like actually how appropriate is this that we're using, you know? Mhm. 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 That is such a great question. So you're asking about when it comes to ethical considerations, do we think about the countries, the regions, for example, that we're operating in? And the example given was China, where facial recognition is really, really thoroughly used. So at Aura, we tend to lean on the highest level of privacy. So while we understand that some of the things that we would get away with in the US, we wouldn't in New Zealand, we lean towards the highest degree of privacy across the board, even if it is something that the rules and the restrictions would be lower in other countries. And I use the Facebook example because it really annoys me. You know, Facebook as a company resides in the US, and so they abide by US laws. And I'm like, they've got an office here. like they've got an office here, they've got users here. And it's one of the really sticky areas in tech, because with technical stuff, like where is your product? Where does it reside? Whose laws are you actually going by? I once, in the very beginning of my career, shameful beginning of my career, worked for a company that deliberately placed its servers in specific locations so that they could get around tax laws, other laws. You know, it was not a good place. It was really dodgy. And so, yeah, highest possible privacy standards, highest possible legal requirements across the board, even if we are allowed to do more and go further in other places, is how we treat it. And I think at the very, very minimum, companies should be abiding by privacy regulations and laws of the country that they are operating in at that time, at the minimum. But it would be great if everyone just went, you know what, this is actually the right thing to do. We're going to go to the nth degree.
All right, we're at 7 o'clock, so I think we'll end it there. Thank you so much, Tanya. That was super, super, super insightful. Give me a round of applause for Tanya. And I have one last thing I'm going to end on, and it comes back to my call to action earlier on. So there was quite a bit of media a few months back about a whistleblower in Facebook. Can anyone tell me what her role in Facebook was? What her job title was? It was product manager. Yeah, so I think maybe product manager for that particular area, but her title was product manager. She blew the whistle, stood up in front of Congress, and was interviewed by them in one of their, whatever they call their select committees over there. You know, are you ready for that conversation? Are you ready to be that person who's pulled up in front of your government to explain how your company is doing things that are not quite so nice? Think about that, because I don't want to be that person. That would scare the hell out of me, to be perfectly honest. So yeah, so you know, this is one of the incentives to really focus and think about these things. Yeah, that's like being on the front page of the news, only worse. So do think about that. So on that cheery note, thank you so much, everyone, for coming out today. This is serious stuff, and this is why I want to talk.